The police had their guns drawn on my 16-year-old son, Lucas, as he knelt to place flowers on his brother's grave. One moment, he was trembling, his hand resting on the flag-draped box in our backyard. The next, a voice barked, "Get on the ground." Half a dozen officers stormed in like it was a raid, all because our neighbor, Susan, reported a suspicious boy with a shovel and a weapon performing some cult-like ritual on HOA property. She didn't know this wasn't just some odd backyard event, it was the burial of my eldest son, Daniel, a decorated veteran who died overseas. And she certainly didn't realize that the woman holding back tears by the roses, walking calmly toward the officers, was the United States Attorney General. That was Susan's final, fatal misstep. It all began 2 weeks earlier when I decided to bury Daniel at home. We owned 5 acres, land my family has held for generations, long before the HOA snatched up the surrounding lots and built their uniform empire. Our property was legally a private burial site, thanks to an old Southern law Susan either didn't grasp or didn't bother to check. Daniel's last wish was simple: to rest under the oak tree he'd climbed as a kid, with Lucas laying the first flowers. So we honored him quietly, privately, with reverence. To Susan, though, our mourning was an affront to her precious community standards. That gray morning, Lucas wore Daniel's old scout jacket, sleeves too long, heart too heavy. It wasn't a big affair, just family, a chaplain, a folded flag, and a soft honor song from a speaker. Lucas stepped forward with wildflowers and Daniel's dog tags, knelt, whispered something, and kissed the wooden urn. Then Susan's voice shattered the silence. "What's going on here?" she screeched from her pristine lawn, arms crossed, brows sky-high. "You can't just bury people wherever you want. This is HOA land." I explained, again, that it was our land, federally exempt from HOA rules. She didn't listen. Susan never did. She saw my grieving son and decided he threatened her property values. 15 minutes later, as we stood in silence around Daniel's resting place, flashing lights appeared at the driveway's edge. Patrol cars swarmed in like we were armed fugitives. My stomach sank as officers reached for their belts, shouting, "On the ground! Hands where we can see them!" Lucas froze, eyes wide with terror, hands hovering. I stepped forward, every instinct screaming, "I'm the nation's top law enforcement officer," but in that moment, I was just a mother watching her only living child treated like a felon. I pulled out my badge, the one I've carried since my oath. "I'm Elizabeth Carter, United States Attorney General." "Stand down." The lead officer blanched, like he'd stumbled into a lion's den in sandals. Susan, meanwhile, stood filming on her phone, smirking like she'd caught a petty thief. When the officers turned to her, uncertain, she waved and said, "I'll be pressing charges. That boy threatened me with a stick." The stick was a folded flagpole. What followed was awkward apologies, nervous shuffling, and Susan yelling, "She's lying. That badge is fake. Anyone can buy one online." An officer whispered to his partner, likely confirming my identity. In seconds, the scene shifted. The officers backed off, Lucas sat up trembling, and Susan, sensing the tide turn, chirped, "I was just keeping the neighborhood safe. There are rules, you know." "Yes, there are," I replied. "And as the chief enforcer of federal law, I'll use every one of them." Later, after ensuring Lucas was safe inside, I walked our property line with a camera. Susan had installed 2 surveillance cameras aimed at our yard, clear privacy violation. I documented them, along with her HOA regulated zone sign nailed to a tree and a cease and desist letter claiming our burial disrupted community tranquility. She didn't know her HOA was a cesspool of shady finances I'd ignored until now. Grief is heavy, a shifting weight, but injustice sparks a flame, and Susan had just struck the match. The next day, I quietly asked a DOJ investigator, Tom, to dig into the HOA's books and charter. I expected petty power trips and petty fines. I didn't expect wire fraud, elder abuse, and a laundry list of violations. The HOA wasn't just mismanaged, it was Susan's personal fiefdom, and she'd just ed the U.S. government. The morning after the burial fiasco, the neighborhood felt still, like it knew a storm was brewing. Susan's lawn ornaments, usually precise as soldiers, were crooked. One flamingo toppled like it fainted from the drama. I sipped coffee on the porch, watching neighbors hurry past, avoiding eye contact. Word had spread not just about Susan's 911 call, but about who I was. A few waved weakly, others hid behind shrubs. They'd all been under Susan's thumb, and now they sensed it might snap. Susan doubled down, posting on the HOA forum that I'd faked my government role to bully honest board members, and that Lucas had terrorized the block with military stunts. She uploaded blurry photos of him with the flag, captioned, "Suspicious youth in camo, armed and dangerous." Someone commented, "Isn't that the AG's son?" Susan replied, "Unconfirmed. Could be crisis actors." That's when I decided she needed a legal reckoning. I called Tom, a meticulous DOJ investigator who looked like a math teacher and thrived on spreadsheets. "Oakwood Estates HOA," I said. "Start with finances, then dig. No rush." He nodded and vanished into his files. Meanwhile, Susan called an emergency HOA meeting, handing out flyers in a VY soar and windbreaker like a campaigner. "Community safety and standards are under attack," her flyer blared. When Lucas and I arrived, heads turned like we'd kicked the door in. Susan gripped the mic, voice quivering with fake concern. "We need to address unapproved property use." She pointed at us. "Last week's unauthorized funeral involved flags, weapons, and distressed minors. Our rules ban ceremonies without HOA oversight." I raised my hand. "Our land's exempt from HOA control, filed with the county since 1979. Check it." Susan smirked. "Anyone can file something. It's not legal without HOA clearance." Lucas opened a folder and read aloud. "Here's the state exemption for family cemeteries on private land, signed and notarized. Here's our deed predates the HOA by 20 years. And here's a court ruling protecting military cemeteries under federal law." The room hushed. Someone muttered, "Oh, wow." Susan flushed, then pivoted. "This isn't just about utes, about noise, flags lowered without permission, and residents' emotional distress. Are you saying grief needs a schedule?" I asked calmly. She blinked, flustered, then called a vote. "All in favor of requiring approval for ceremonies, burials, memorials, flags, gatherings over 4 people say aye." Only 2 hands rose, hers and a guy who looked bribed with cookies. A voice piped up. We didn't know we could ignore her before. Laughter broke the tension. After, Tom called, "You'll want to see this." His files revealed a mess. HOA funds funneled to fake landscaping companies, high-end catering for board lunches, and wire transfers to Susan's PayPal labeled Community Enrichment. Worse, she'd hired a firm to install cameras hidden in birdhouses, lamps, mailboxes, streaming footage to her laptop. She'd spied on neighbors, recorded kids, tracked routines. It wasn't just creepy, it was illegal. I didn't act, yet he wanted her to squirm. Susan grew erratic, issuing absurd fines. Law 75 for overly reflective wind chimes, a citation for unauthorized laughter after 9 p.m. Neighbors, once cowed, now swapped stories of her tyranny. Lucas tended Daniel's grave, planting flowers and building a bench. His hands steadied. He was healing. Susan, though, unraveled, posting about government spies and claiming Daniel's flag emitted wildlife-disturbing noise. She was citing a dead soldier. That's when I moved. At the next public HOA meeting, I took the mic from Susan mid-rant. "It's time your neighbors see what you've done." A screen lit up. HOA fund transfers, surveillance footage of private homes, fake citations with doctored photos. The room erupted, stories poured out. Fines for overgrown hair, harassment over a red car. Federal agents raided her home that night, seizing cameras, drives, laptops. Susan stood silent, clutching a mug, reading, "I run this place." Not anymore. She sued me for emotional distress, but the Judhea no-nonsense woman tossed it as frivolous. Lucas testified, voice steady, about the funeral ambush. Susan spiraled, shouting about HOA sovereignty, until she was removed. She was indicted on wire fraud, privacy violations, elder abuse, and more. The HOA dissolved. Its office became Daniel's Peace, a memorial garden. Susan got 6 years in prison. The neighborhood bloomed, yellow houses, barking dogs, free laughter. Lucas and I found peace under Daniel's oak, where love and truth had toppled Susan's reign.